My name is Edward Miller, and I am 80 years old. I never thought I would sit down to tell my story, but here I am, speaking out after a lifetime of silence. I want people to understand why I made the choices I did, why I lived the way I lived, and why, after all these years of being invisible to the very family I raised, I finally decided to speak. My life has been quiet, almost too quiet, but sometimes silence holds the loudest truths. It was a Saturday afternoon in early autumn. The sun hung low, pouring a golden light across my small front yard. The air smelled faintly of pine and dry leaves, a reminder that another year was slipping away. I stood with a broom in my hands, brushing away fallen leaves from the cracked concrete walkway that led up to my porch. My joints ached the way old joints always do, my back stiff as though the years had poured themselves into my bones. Still, there was a comfort in the routine, in hearing the scrape of the broom bristles, in knowing this small patch of ground was mine to care for. I had lived alone for many years, in a modest one-story house on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was home. The paint on the siding had faded, the shutters were crooked, and the porch swing squeaked whenever the wind caught it. But every corner of that house held memories of my late wife, Margaret, and the life we had built together. She had been gone for over 2 decades, yet I still spoke to her in the evenings when I sat at the kitchen table. Sometimes I wondered if that made me foolish, or if it was simply the last act of devotion a widower could offer. That afternoon, I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel drive. I turned, expecting perhaps the mailman or a neighbor stopping by to borrow a tool. Instead, it was my eldest son, Daniel. He walked quickly, his shoulders squared, his jaw set with the confidence of someone who had already decided what he was going to say before arriving. Behind him, his younger sister Clara stepped out of the car, carrying her purse as though she were about to attend a business meeting rather than visit her father. Daniel didn't waste a second on greetings. His voice was sharp, each word cutting the autumn air. "Dad, we heard you sold the land. Everyone's talking about it. How much did you get? A few $100,000? Maybe more? So tell us, how are you planning to split it?" For a moment, I stood frozen, my broom pressed against the porch railing. His words fell heavy, like stones hurled at a fragile window. I didn't answer right away. I forced myself to draw in a slow breath, to swallow the sting rising in my throat. My heart gave a dull thud, the kind of pain no doctor could fix. I glanced at Clara, hoping for a trace of softness, a sliver of kindness in her expression. But she only crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing, as though she too had come for an accounting rather than a visit. I smiled faintly, though it was the kind of smile a man wears when he knows he has become a stranger in his own family. I turned back to the broom, sliding it against the concrete, pretending to sweep away dust that wasn't there. My hands trembled slightly as I tightened my grip on the wooden handle. "I've made tea," I said finally, my voice calm, almost too calm. "Why don't you both come inside?" They exchanged a quick glance, a silent agreement that whatever answers they wanted, they might find them within those faded walls. As they stepped past me and into the house, I paused on the porch for a moment longer. The afternoon light flickered through the trees, scattering across the yard like shards of stained glass. My chest tightened, not just from age, but from something deeper, an ache that comes when you realize the people you once carried on your shoulders now see you only as a wallet with a pulse. I knew this wasn't the first time they had come with questions wrapped in demands. It had been years since either Daniel or Clara had visited me without some hidden motive. Birthdays had passed without a phone call. Holidays were celebrated in houses I wasn't invited to. My health scares, the nights I drove myself to the emergency room when my heart fluttered irregularly. None of those drew them near. But the moment the community whispered that I had sold my last piece of land, suddenly my phone rang. Suddenly they remembered I existed. I didn't confront them right then. Instead, I poured the tea into chipped mugs, the steam rising between us like a barrier. I set the cups gently on the table, watching their impatient hands tap against the wood, their eyes darting not to me, but to the envelope I had left sitting near the counter. Inside was the paperwork for the sale, the very thing they were hungry to see. As I sat across from them, I let the silence stretch. In that silence, I remembered every other time I had been invisible, Every other time my worth had been measured in dollars and deeds instead of love and care. I did not know it yet, but that afternoon would become the beginning of the final chapter in my story. The choice I made in those moments, how I handled their questions, how I answered their unspoken demands, would ripple far beyond that kitchen table. It would uncover truths long buried, ignite conflicts that had smoldered in the shadows, and force me to finally draw a line between what it means to be a father and what it means to be a man who refuses to be used. And so, as I lifted my cup of tea and met my son's gaze, I thought to myself, this is not the first time they have forgotten who I am, but it will be the last time I allow them to. What they did not know, what no one in that room could have guessed, was that the money they so desperately wanted was already spoken for. But that revelation, the one that would change everything, was still waiting in the shadows. The tea on the table grew colder as the silence thickened around us. Daniel's fingers tapped faster, each beat like a demand, while Clara adjusted her scarf and gave me a glance that wasn't concern, it was calculation. Their presence in my kitchen should have felt familiar, but instead it felt like a business meeting in a stranger's office. My own children sat across from me, yet I felt more like a witness than a father. The truth is, what happened that afternoon didn't come out of nowhere. The seeds had been planted long ago, watered by years of neglect, and harvested now in this moment of sudden greed. As I looked at Daniel's restless hands and Clara's cool expression, my mind drifted back to the countless days when my presence didn't matter to them, when I had been little more than a background figure in their lives. I remembered the spring after Margaret passed. The house was too quiet then, every creak of the floorboards reminding me of her absence. I invited Daniel and Clara over for dinner, hoping to fill the void with conversation, with laughter, with something. They both promised they would come. I cooked Margaret's favorite roast chicken recipe, set the table with the good china, even placed flowers in a vase the way she always did. I waited as the minutes stretched into hours. The food cooled, the candles burned low, and the chairs across from me stayed empty. Daniel texted the next morning, "Sorry, Dad, work ran late." Clara didn't send a word. That night, I ate leftovers by myself, chewing slowly, telling myself they were busy, telling myself not to take it personally. But it happened again and again. Thanksgiving came, and while families around the neighborhood gathered for turkey and pumpkin pie, I ate a plate of mashed potatoes alone. They had chosen to spend the day with friends instead. Even my birthday, the day I turned 75, passed without a single visit. A neighbor dropped off a slice of cake, but my own children sent nothing but silence. I told myself excuses. I told myself modern life was demanding, that perhaps they loved me in ways I couldn't see. But the truth kept breaking through in small, painful ways. When Daniel needed a loan to cover his mortgage, he appeared at my door with urgency. When Clara wanted help with tuition for her daughter, she called me 3 times in 1 week. Each time, I gave what I could. I convinced myself that maybe helping them financially was my role now. Maybe it was how I could stay relevant. But when I was the one who needed something, a ride to the hospital, company on a lonely evening, they were nowhere to be found. One memory still burned sharper than the rest. I had developed pneumonia during a harsh winter. My chest rattled with every cough, the air icy against my fragile lungs. I picked up the phone, desperate for comfort, and dialed Daniel. His voice was clipped. "Dad, I can't tonight. Big meeting tomorrow. Call an ambulance if you need to." He hung up before I could answer. Clara didn't even return my call. That night, wrapped in 2 coats, I drove myself to the urgent care clinic, every mile feeling like it might be my last. I sat in the waiting room, shivering, while other patients leaned on family members for support. I leaned only on the hard plastic chair beneath me. Moments like that shape a man. They etch themselves into your bones, so even years later, you can feel the sting. Sitting at that kitchen table with Daniel and Clara now, I realized the pattern had never changed. They arrived only when my value could be measured in dollars, never when it could be measured in love. Daniel finally broke the silence, his voice steady but sharpened with impatience. "Dad, you know it's a lot of money. You're 80 now. Managing that kind of sum isn't easy. You could get taken advantage of. We just want to make sure it's handled properly, for everyone's sake." Clara added softly. We're not trying to pressure you. We just think it would be better if we helped. You know, to take some of the stress off your shoulders. Her smile was thin, the kind of smile that belongs more in a courtroom than a family home. Their words might have fooled an outsider, but to me they rang hollow. I knew what they meant. Help didn't mean lifting burdens. Help meant control. Help meant signatures and transfers and decisions made without me. I sipped the tea, its bitterness steadying me, and watched their faces. For the first time in years, I didn't feel sorrow. I felt clarity. The room around us was the same kitchen where Margaret used to hum while she cooked, where Daniel once sat doing homework, where Clara once braided her doll's hair. Now those same walls echoed with greed instead of laughter. The lemon scent of the cleaner couldn't mask the staleness in the air. Outside, a branch tapped against the window in the breeze, like a reminder that time does not wait for anyone, not even fathers trying to hold their families together. I set my cup down slowly, porcelain meeting wood with a soft clink. My voice was calm when I finally spoke. You've both made it clear why you're here. But before we talk about money, let me remind you of something. This house, this table, this very room has seen more silence from you than I can count. And now you arrive, not with concern for me, but with concern for a bank balance. That tells me everything I need to know. Their eyes flickered, surprise breaking through their practiced expressions. Daniel shifted in his chair, ready to argue. Clara straightened, lips pressing into a firm line. They didn't know it yet, but I was no longer the silent man they had grown used to. What neither of them realized was that my decision had already been made long before they walked through my door. The land, the money, the future, it was all accounted for. They thought they could control the story, but they were only characters in a chapter they had never read. And as I looked at them across the table, I knew the moment of revelation was coming soon. The words I had just spoken lingered in the air, heavy as stone. Daniel shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening, while Clara kept her eyes fixed on me, her silence louder than anything she could have said. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint ticking of the wall clock, each second reminding me that time had stripped away more than just years. It had stripped away the illusions I once held about my family. This wasn't the first time I had felt like a stranger among my own blood. The distance between us had been built slowly, brick by brick, over decades. As I sat across from Daniel and Clara, my mind pulled me backward, back through the years to all the moments that had prepared me for this one. I remembered when Daniel graduated from college. It should have been a proud day, a celebration of everything we had sacrificed to get him there. Margaret and I had worked long hours, she taking extra shifts at the library, me fixing cars on weekends to make sure his tuition was paid. On the day of his ceremony, he walked across the stage without even glancing toward us. Later, at the party, he thanked his friends, his professors, even his classmates, but he never mentioned us. Margaret squeezed my hand, whispering that he was nervous, that he didn't mean it. But the truth was plain. He had already begun rewriting the story of his success without us in it. Clara had her own ways of cutting deep. She was always quick to remind me of what I couldn't give. When she was 16, she wanted a brand new car for her birthday. We simply couldn't afford it. I offered her the old sedan I had fixed up, solid and reliable, though far from glamorous. She rolled her eyes, called it embarrassing, and refused to drive it. She told her friends that her father was too cheap to care about her future. I swallowed the hurt and let it pass, thinking she would understand one day. But she never did. The pattern repeated itself through the years. Each slight, each disappointment layered itself like dust on forgotten furniture. One summer, Daniel asked me to co-sign a loan so he and his wife could buy a bigger house. He promised it would only be temporary, that he had everything under control. A year later, the house was refinanced, the money spent, and I was left with nothing but the burden of knowing my signature had been used to patch over mistakes I never made. Clara, on the other hand, leaned on me constantly for small favors. A bill here, a childcare fee there. Each time she promised to pay me back, but repayment never came. And yet, through all of it, I stayed silent. I told myself that's what fathers do. They endure. They carry the weight without complaint. They forgive because love demands forgiveness. But forgiveness, I learned, is not the same as acceptance. Forgiveness heals, but acceptance of neglect only corrodes. The lowest point came after Margaret's passing. I had just lost the only person who had ever truly seen me, and in the middle of my grief, I reached for my children. I thought surely they would come closer. Surely they would fill the space she left behind. Instead, they grew more distant. On the night of her funeral, after everyone had gone, I sat alone in the quiet house. Daniel and Clara left early, saying they had flights to catch, responsibilities waiting. They did not stay the night, did not linger to hold me up when I could barely stand. I remember staring at Margaret's photograph, whispering into the silence, asking if she had known it would turn out this way. Those memories now returned with brutal clarity. Sitting across from them in the same kitchen where Margaret once laughed, I could see the truth as clearly as the sunlight streaming through the dusty window. This was not a sudden betrayal. This was the inevitable result of years of choices to ignore, to neglect, to treat me not as a father, but as a resource. Daniel finally broke the silence, his voice sharp. "Dad, you're being dramatic. We've always been here for you." I let out a quiet laugh, though it sounded more like a sigh. "Always? Tell me, Daniel, where were you when I drove myself to urgent care with pneumonia? Where were you when Christmas passed in silence? Where were you when I spent my birthday alone at this very table?" Clara flinched, her lips pressing into a thin line. Daniel looked away, his fingers tightening into fists. Their silence was answer enough. I leaned forward, my eyes steady. "Do you know what it feels like to be needed only when your wallet is full? Do you know what it feels like to be a father only when it is convenient for your children? That is what I have lived with for years. And now you come, not with love, not with care, but with entitlement." The words hung there, sharp and undeniable. For the first time, they both looked uncomfortable, as though the mirror I had held up to them reflected more than they were ready to see. But I knew this moment wasn't about guilt. It was about truth. The truth that the money they sought would not be theirs. The truth that the man they thought they could manipulate was no longer willing to play the role of silent provider. As I sat back in my chair, I felt something shift inside me. The years of quiet endurance, the decades of swallowing hurt, had led to this. And though they didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of the reckoning. The story of that land, of the money it brought, was already written. And when they discovered the ending, their world would tilt in ways they could not imagine. The weight of silence pressed down again after my words, thick enough to feel in my chest. Daniel's face was flushed, his jaw set tight, and Clara's eyes darted to the envelope on the counter like moths drawn to flame. The truth had unsettled them, but what came next would shake them far more. Daniel slammed his palm against the table, the sharp crack echoing through the kitchen. "Enough, Dad. We're not here to argue about the past. We're here because you have a responsibility. That land, that money, it belongs to the family, not just you." His words cut like a knife, not because they surprised me, but because they confirmed what I had long suspected. To him, my years of sacrifice, my quiet nights alone, my decades of labor, they counted for nothing. All that mattered was the figure written on a piece of paper. Clara leaned forward, her tone softer but no less dangerous. "Dad, think about what's best for everyone. You don't need that kind of money at your age. You could make things easier for us, for the grandchildren. Isn't that what family is supposed to do? Take care of each other?" I looked at her, and for a moment, I saw the little girl who used to curl up in her mother's lap while I read bedtime stories. But that girl was gone, replaced by a woman who measured love in inheritance shares. The ache in my chest was sharp, but beneath it grew something stronger: resolve. I stood slowly, the chair scraping against the floor. My joints protested, but my voice did not tremble when I spoke. "You want to talk about responsibility? Let's talk about what responsibility really means. I was responsible when I worked 2 jobs to keep food on this table. I was responsible when I bailed you out of debts, Daniel. I was responsible when I paid your tuition, Clara, and when I cared for your children so you could chase your own life. Responsibility has defined every year of my existence. And do you know what I got in return? Silence." Daniel opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand, and for once he stopped. I crossed the kitchen, my footsteps steady, and picked up the envelope that held the documents from the land sale. The paper inside crinkled softly as I placed it on the table between us. Their eyes locked onto it as if it were treasure uncovered after a long search. "This," I said, tapping the envelope, "is what you came for. But you should know the truth before you tear it open. The money from the land is not yours to claim. It never was." Clara's voice rose, sharper now, desperation breaking through her polished composure. "What are you talking about? You're our father. That money should stay in the family. Who else would you give it to?" I looked from her to Daniel, and then I said the words I had carried for months. "I've already made arrangements. The money will go towards something greater than your greed. It will be used to establish a scholarship fund in your mother's name." Margaret believed in education, in giving opportunities to those who had none. She spent her life helping others, even when we had little. This is how she will be remembered. The room erupted. Daniel's chair screeched as he shoved it back, his voice booming. "You can't do that. That money is ours by right. Mom would never—" I cut him off, my voice low but firm. "Don't you dare speak for your mother. She gave everything for you, and when she was gone, you gave nothing back. You abandoned the very values she lived by. Don't twist her memory to justify your selfishness." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but not the kind born of love or regret. They were tears of frustration, of losing something she had already spent in her mind. "So you're just going to give it away? To strangers? While your own family struggles?" I shook my head slowly. "You are not struggling. You are living beyond your means, chasing comfort while ignoring the people who matter. Strangers have shown me more kindness in recent years than my own children. The nurse at the clinic who checked on me after hours, the neighbor who brings soup when I'm sick, the young man who helps carry my groceries. They ask for nothing, yet give freely. And you come only when you smell money." The words landed like blows. Daniel's fists clenched, his face red with rage, but he didn't move. Clara looked away, unable to meet my gaze. For the first time in years, I felt the power shift. I was no longer the quiet man they could manipulate. I was their father, yes, but I was also a man reclaiming his dignity. The clock ticked on, marking the moment their illusions shattered. They realized the inheritance they had counted on, the prize they had come to collect, was already gone. And with it, the last thread tying them to the father they had long taken for granted. I picked up my tea again, the liquid now lukewarm, and sipped it slowly. My voice was calm as I said, "This conversation is over. The decisions have been made. You may leave now, or you may stay for tea, but understand this, your anger will not change the truth." The kitchen fell silent again, but this silence was different. It was no longer heavy with regret. It was filled with finality, with the certainty of choices made. Daniel and Clara did not know it yet, but that day marked the end of the old order in this family. The money they thought would bind us together had instead revealed the depth of the cracks that had been there all along. And as I set my cup back on the saucer, I felt lighter than I had in years. The silence that followed my declaration was not the calm silence of peace, but the tense silence before a storm. Daniel's breathing was heavy, each exhale sharp as if he were holding back words too jagged to release. Clara stared at the table, her fingers twitching against the purse in her lap, her face caught between disbelief and fury. Then, as if a dam had broken, Daniel leaned forward, his voice loud enough to rattle the window panes. "You're out of your mind, Dad. A scholarship fund? Do you even know what you're doing? That money could change our lives. It should stay in this family." I met his gaze steadily. "It's already decided. The papers are signed, the account is established. This is not a discussion. It's done." Clara's composure finally cracked. She pressed her palm flat against the table and stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "So we mean nothing to you? Is that it? After everything, you would rather give to strangers than to your own children?" Her words cut deep, but not in the way she intended. They cut because as they revealed the truth she couldn't see. "Children?" I asked quietly. "You call yourselves my children when you have treated me like a stranger for years?" "No, Clara. This isn't about choosing strangers over family. This is about honoring the one person who never turned her back on me, your mother. She deserves this legacy, not your resentment." Daniel slammed his fist against the table so hard the mugs rattled. You can't just erase us, Dad. We're your blood. You think some scholarship fund will sit by your bed when you're sick? You think a bunch of kids you'll never meet will visit your grave? You're wrong. And when the money's gone, you'll have nothing. I let his words hang, let them echo in the kitchen where Margaret once sang. My voice, when it came, was steady. I already have nothing. That is what happens when your children forget you exist until there's money to chase. So don't threaten me with loneliness. I've been living with it for years. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but again, they were not born of love. They were the tears of someone watching her expectations collapse. Dad, you're making a mistake. We could have used that money for the kids' future, for our homes, for, I interrupted, my tone sharp enough to still her words. For yourselves. Don't hide behind your children, Clara. You're not asking for their future. You're asking for your comfort. And I will not fund greed dressed up as responsibility. The room pulsed with anger. I could feel it in the air, thick and hot, pressing down like a summer storm. Daniel pushed back from the table and began pacing, his footsteps heavy against the old linoleum floor. Clara stayed rigid, her hand clutching the purse strap as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. I watched them both, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't expected. Freedom. This confrontation was not breaking me. It was lifting me. Every word I spoke stripped away the weight of years of silence. Finally, Daniel stopped pacing and pointed a finger at me, his voice shaking. If you go through with this, don't expect us to be around anymore. Don't expect visits. Don't expect calls. Don't expect us at your funeral. The threat might have crushed me once, but now it only confirmed what I already knew. Daniel, I said softly, I stopped expecting those things a long time ago. The words landed like a final blow. Clara covered her mouth, a gasp slipping through her fingers. Daniel froze, his face hardening as though the ground beneath him had given way. I stood, the aches in my body reminding me of my age, but the strength in my voice reminding me of my resolve. If you walk away today, understand this. It will be by your choice, not mine. I gave everything I could as a father. I loved you beyond reason, but love without respect is slavery, and I will not be a slave to your greed. For a long moment, none of us moved. The clock ticked, the wind rustled against the window, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Then, slowly, Daniel lowered his hand. Clara sank back into her chair, tears slipping down her cheeks. Neither of them had an answer, because there was no answer left to give. I returned to my seat and lifted my tea. It had grown cold, but I drank it anyway. The bitterness steadied me, a reminder that truth is rarely sweet but always necessary. The storm had broken, and the wreckage was clear. My children's illusions were shattered, their entitlement exposed. They came for money, and they left with the weight of their own reflection. What they didn't realize, what they couldn't yet see, was that this was not just about dollars or deeds. It was about dignity, mine, Margaret's, and perhaps one day even theirs, if they could find their way back to what truly mattered. But that day was far away. For now, the house was filled with the quiet aftermath of battle, a quiet I no longer feared. After Daniel's last words faded into the walls of my kitchen, the house fell into a silence so profound it felt alive. He and Clara sat in front of me, shaken, stripped of the power they thought they held. I had expected them to storm out, to slam the door and leave me with the echo of their anger. But instead, they stayed, caught in a moment they did not know how to escape. Finally, Daniel muttered something under his breath and grabbed his jacket. Clara followed, her face pale, her eyes darting anywhere but toward mine. Without another word, they left. The front door closed behind them with a hollow thud, and their footsteps faded down the driveway until the sound of their car engine carried them away. And just like that, I was alone again. But this time, the loneliness didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like clarity. It felt like freedom. I walked back into the kitchen and stared at the envelope on the table. It was only paper, ink pressed into lines and numbers, yet it had become a mirror, reflecting the truth about the people I had raised and the choices I had made. For decades, I believed silence was survival, that if I endured their distance and gave them what they wanted, somehow we would remain a family. But silence had not saved me. It had only allowed neglect to grow unchecked. I picked up the envelope and slid it into a drawer. Its contents no longer mattered. What mattered was the decision already set in motion, the scholarship in Margaret's name. I could almost see her smile, the way her eyes lit up whenever she talked about the students she helped at the library, the way she believed every young person deserved a chance. In honoring her, I had finally done something that felt right. That night, the house was quiet in the way it always was, but for once, the quiet didn't sting. I sat in my chair on the porch, the cool evening air brushing against my face, and I felt peace settle in my chest. The stars spread wide across the dark sky, countless and distant, yet somehow close enough to comfort. I thought of Margaret, of the life we built, of the laughter that once filled these walls. I thought of Daniel and Clara too, but without bitterness. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. In the days that followed, the calls started. First Daniel, his voice sharp with accusation, demanding I reconsider. Then Clara, her tone softer, but still wrapped in the same thread of expectation. I listened, but my answers never changed. The decision is final, I told them each time. You may not understand now, but one day you will. The truth is, maybe they never will. Maybe they will carry their anger for years, clinging to the belief that I betrayed them. But I know the reality. The betrayal was theirs long before mine. I had given, and they had taken. I had asked for little, and they had given nothing. Love without presence is not love at all. One afternoon, as I walked to the mailbox, my neighbor stopped me. She was a young mother, her little boy clutching her hand as they strolled past. She smiled and asked how I was doing. Just a simple question, but it struck me harder than any demand for money. In that moment, I realized kindness from a stranger felt more like family than years of neglect from my own children. I knew then that I had chosen correctly. The scholarship would carry Margaret's name, but it would also carry my truth. It would stand as proof that legacy is not measured in what you leave to those who expect it, but in what you give to those who truly need it. As the weeks passed, I began to see my life differently, not as a story of abandonment, but as a lesson. I had lived long enough to understand that family is not just blood. Family is presence, care, and the willingness to stand together when times are hard. Daniel and Clara may never see it that way, but perhaps the young students who receive Margaret's scholarship will. Perhaps they will carry forward the kind of gratitude and compassion my own children never learned. And that, I realized, is enough. To anyone listening to my story now, I will tell you this. Do not wait until it is too late to see the truth. Love is not about money. Love is about showing up, about remembering birthdays, about visiting when someone is sick, about calling just to ask, how are you? If you fail in those things, no inheritance will fix it. And if you succeed in those things, no inheritance will be necessary. I am Edward Miller. I am 80 years old. And though I live alone in a small house with crooked shutters and a squeaky porch swing, I am no longer invisible. My story is not about loss. It is about finding strength when silence no longer serves you. If you have walked this far with me, thank you. And if you believe stories like mine should be heard, shared, and remembered, then I invite you to stay with me a little longer. Subscribe so that the voices of those who have been overlooked, dismissed, or silenced can keep finding their way into the light. Because sometimes the quietest lives hold the loudest lessons.